They laughed at her name, said she'd never fly, a call sign of mockery beneath the sky. Through storms and doubt, she rose above. Angel-01, fierce and brave, a legend of love. Asterisk, before we dive into the incredible journey of Angel-01, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story of courage, heroism, and triumph. Now, let's take flight into the story. The sun had barely risen over the sleepy town of Ridgefield, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and secrets rarely survived more than a week. Yet despite the calm streets and quiet mornings, Captain Emily, Angel-01, Harper, felt the weight of a storm brewing inside her chest. She had always known the world could be unkind to those who dared to step out of the expected path. But even she hadn't anticipated just how sharp the barbs would be. Emily had grown up near the Ridgefield Airfield, a small military base on the outskirts of town. From an early age, the roar of engines and the smell of jet fuel had called to her like a song she couldn't resist. While other kids played catch in the streets, Emily had been building model planes, memorizing flight manuals, and dreaming of the day she would climb into a cockpit herself. Her determination was unwavering, but the path she chose was never easy. By the time Emily joined the Air Force, she had already developed a reputation for discipline and skill. Yet even there, she faced the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, undermining of her peers. Her call sign, Angel-01, was meant to be a badge of honor, a symbol of her precision and protective instincts in the air. Instead, it became a target. Angel-01? Seriously? A fellow pilot snickered during her first simulation exercise. What are you, some kind of choir soprano who thinks she's saving the world? Emily had smiled politely, her fingers tightening on the controls. She had learned early on that a response, any response, often fueled the ridicule further. So, she endured, focusing on the hum of the engines, the coordination of the flight instruments, and the rhythm of her own heartbeat. It wasn't just the teasing that wore on her. It was the doubt, the quiet questioning in the eyes of her superiors, the sideways glances from other pilots who assumed she wasn't capable. Ridgefield Airfield was a small base, with tight-knit crews and rigid hierarchies, and every misstep was magnified. Emily had seen other women falter under less pressure, retreat quietly to avoid ridicule, but she refused to back down. She had spent her life preparing for this, and she wouldn't let petty mockery define her. Her mornings began before dawn. She ran laps around the airfield, her legs pounding against the cold asphalt as if to burn away the fatigue and frustration that accumulated like dark clouds in her chest. By the time she suited up for flight training, her determination radiated in every movement. She was precise, disciplined, and unyielding, qualities that should have commanded respect, but instead made her a target for gossip. Angel-01's going up again, muttered one of the mechanics, half amused, half disbelieving, as Emily ran. Pre-flight checks on a sleek F-16 fighter jet. Bet she's gonna cry if she hits turbulence. Emily didn't flinch. She tightened the harness across her shoulders and adjusted her helmet. The taunts bounced off her like raindrops off a hardened windshield. She had learned that real strength was not in the absence of fear or insult, but in the ability to rise above it. Her first solo flight was scheduled for that morning, and as she taxied down the runway, she felt the familiar mix of adrenaline and calm that came only to someone who belonged in the cockpit. The other pilots watched, some skeptical, some amused, but Emily focused entirely on the instruments, the throttle, and the wind against her helmet. When she finally lifted off, the ground falling away beneath her, there was no room for doubt, only the clarity of purpose she had cultivated for years. Minutes later, she returned, landing smoothly despite the sneers from the control tower. A few of the young pilots tried to make jokes, But Emily simply removed her helmet, a quiet confidence radiating from her every movement. She had flown the path she was meant to, and nothing anyone said could undo that. Still, the journey ahead was far from easy. At Ridgefield, reputations were stubborn, and old prejudices ran deep. For Emily, each successful flight was a small victory, a step toward proving that the name Angel-01 was not a joke, it was a promise. A promise that she would endure, that she would rise, and that someday those who mocked her would have no choice but to acknowledge her worth. As she walked back to the hangar, the first rays of sunlight glinting off the jets, Emily's mind was already on the next challenge. She knew the mockery would not end overnight. She knew that every mission, every maneuver, every flawless landing would be a battle, not just in the air, but against the whispers, the doubts, and the sneers on the ground, and she was ready, because Angel-01 was more than a call sign. She was a force of will, a symbol of endurance, and soon she would prove that the pilots of Ridgefield Airfield had underestimated her at their own peril. The days at Ridgefield Airfield passed with the monotony and precision of a military schedule. Yet for Emily, each day carried its own small battles. The mockery hadn't disappeared. It had only grown quieter, more insidious. Whispers followed her down the hangar corridors. Smirks appeared just as she passed, and the nickname Angel-01 was tossed like a fragile joke she wasn't allowed to defend herself against. But she had learned that mockery could be used as fuel. Every sneer was a reminder of why she had chosen this life. Every sideways glance was proof that she had work to do. Emily began volunteering for extra simulations, night exercises, and long-range flights that others considered too risky. Some whispered that she was reckless. She called it preparation. Her first true test came during a joint training exercise with the neighboring airbase. It was a simulation of a high-stakes interception mission, jets scrambling to intercept a rogue aircraft in restricted airspace. Emily had been assigned to lead one of the two squadrons. The other squadron, made up mostly of male pilots who had mocked her since day one, rolled their eyes when they saw Angel-01 on the flight roster. Lead? Seriously? She can barely handle the simulator without stalling, muttered one pilot, his voice loud enough for others to hear. Emily took the comment in stride. She knew the mission would speak for her better than any words. When the jets roared down the runway and lifted into the crisp morning sky, Emily felt the familiar surge of control, the connection to the machine beneath her, and the clarity that came only from being exactly where she was meant to be. The exercise quickly escalated. The simulated rogue aircraft performed unexpected maneuvers, cutting dangerously close to restricted zones and forcing the pilots into high-speed evasive action. Many of the other pilots hesitated, unsure of how to respond to the increasingly complex scenario. Emily, however, relied on her training and instincts. She issued precise commands over the radio, guiding her squadron with calm authority, and executed maneuvers that kept them in optimal positions to intercept the target. From the ground, the instructors watched in growing admiration. Even some of her critics exchanged glances, beginning to recognize that the pilot they had mocked was not just competent, she was exceptional. But it wasn't enough for Emily to merely succeed. She knew that to truly change perceptions, she had to excel under pressure. As the rogue aircraft executed a sudden dive toward the mountainous terrain outside Ridgefield, Emily made a split-second decision. She broke formation, banking sharply, to cut off the simulated threat, placing herself directly in harm's way. The other pilots froze for a moment, shocked at the audacity of her maneuver. Then they followed. Emily's quick thinking and courage allowed the squadron to neutralize the target successfully, completing the exercise without incident. Back on the ground, the hangar buzzed with a mix of disbelief and newfound respect. The instructors debriefed the pilots, and for the first time, Emily's call sign was spoken without a trace of mockery. You handled that perfectly. Angel-01, said Colonel Jenkins, the base commander, his voice steady but impressed. You anticipated the scenario better than anyone else. Well done. Even some of the skeptical pilots nodded, reluctant to admit they had been wrong. Emily allowed herself a small, private smile. The recognition wasn't everything, but it was a sign that her perseverance was beginning to pay off. Yet, as often happens in life, triumph brought its own challenges. Not everyone was ready to accept her success. One of the senior pilots, Lieutenant Harris, made it clear he believed she had merely been lucky, that her daring maneuver had skirted the line of recklessness. You got lucky. Angel-01, he said, leaning against the hangar wall later that day. Don't let it go to your head. One mistake out there and you're toast. Emily met his gaze evenly. Luck doesn't get you through months of training, Lieutenant. Skill does. And skill doesn't come from underestimating the people around. It comes from pushing yourself past the fear everyone else is too polite to face. Harris snorted, but said no more. Emily knew some battles weren't won in public. They were earned over time through consistency, discipline, and courage. Over the following weeks, Emily continued to volunteer for demanding assignments, often taking the missions others avoided. She faced turbulence, mechanical challenges, and even near collisions in training. Yet every time she returned safely, the whispers of doubt began to fade. Slowly, her peers began to understand that Angel-01 was not a fragile nickname, but a title earned through bravery and unshakable determination. Outside the base, Ridgefield remained the quiet, predictable town it had always been, but the small airfield and the people who worked there were quietly changing. Emily Harper's presence forced everyone to confront assumptions about skill, courage, and the weight of a name. And yet, Emily never allowed herself to celebrate too soon. She knew that respect could be fleeting, that one misstep could undo months of hard-earned credibility. More importantly, she understood that true mastery wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about proving to herself that she could rise. No matter how heavy the doubts, the mockery, or the pressure. Late one evening, after the base had quieted down, and the hangar lights cast long shadows across the rows of jets, Emily sat in the cockpit of her F-16. The hum of the engine, the subtle vibration under her fingertips, and the endless sky above reminded her why she had chosen this life. You can do this, she whispered to herself, a mantra that had carried her through every trial so far. No matter what they say, no matter what they think, you are Angel-01, and someday they'll have no choice but to see it too. Her eyes rose to the horizon, where the fading sun painted the clouds in streaks of gold and crimson. Ahead of her lay countless missions, challenges, and moments that would test every ounce of her courage. But Emily was ready. She had faced mockery, skepticism, and doubt, and each time she had returned stronger. The legend of Angel-01 was only beginning. The morning fog hung low over Ridgefield Airfield, curling around the runways like a living thing, hiding the rising sun in a soft gray shroud. Emily Harper stood at the edge of the tarmac, her helmet tucked under one arm, staring at her F-16, as if it were an extension of herself. Today was not a routine training exercise. Today she would face her first real mission, a test not only of skill but of nerve, leadership, and judgment under pressure. The alert had come just before dawn. A civilian aircraft, carrying medical supplies to a remote hospital, had lost communication with air traffic control. It was off course, veering dangerously close to restricted military zones, and there were reports of mechanical failure. The Air Force scrambled jets to intercept, and Emily, due to her exceptional record in simulations and night exercises, had been assigned to lead the interception squadron. As she climbed into the cockpit, the familiar vibration of the jets, Systems came alive under her fingertips. Her heart thumped not with fear, but with anticipation. She had trained for this moment for years, and yet the stakes had never felt higher. Every pilot on the base knew the consequences of failure: potential loss of life, damage to the aircraft, and a reputation tarnished beyond repair. For Emily, this was the moment where mockery and doubt could either follow her into the clouds or die in the wake of her success. Lieutenant Harris, still visibly skeptical, was beside her in the formation. "Remember," he said in a low, clipped tone, "don't get reckless. One mistake, and it's on you." Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she checked her instruments, synchronized her communications, and focused on the path ahead. "Copy," she said finally, her voice calm and steady. "We're going in." The jets lifted off the runway with the roar of unleashed power, cutting through the thick morning mist. Emily's squadron fell into formation seamlessly, the precision of their movements a testament to countless hours of training. Yet the situation quickly proved to be more complex than anyone had anticipated. The civilian aircraft was spiraling, its automated systems failing, and weather conditions were deteriorating faster than forecasts had predicted. Emily made split-second decisions, her hands steady on the controls as she guided her squadron closer to the distressed plane. "Angel-01 to all units," she called over the radio. "Keep formation tight. We're intercepting from the left. Maintain visual contact, but avoid aggressive maneuvers. We need to guide them safely, not scare them." Further, her calm authority was met with a mix of relief and surprise. Even Harris followed her lead without protest, and the rest of the squadron adjusted instinctively, trusting her judgment despite months of previous skepticism. The civilian aircraft wobbled violently as Emily approached, smoke curling from one of its engines. She could see the terrified faces of the passengers through the windows. She knew there was no room for error. One miscalculation could send the plane into the mountains that rose sharply to the north of Ridgefield. "Angel-01. "Your call," Harris said, his voice unusually respectful now. Emily's mind raced, calculating angles, wind speed, and descent trajectory. She remembered her early days at the base, the sneers, the doubts, the whispered jokes about her call. Sighing, each memory fueled her focus rather than weakening it. "Guide them gently," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Keep them aligned with the runway. I'll handle the final approach." She took the lead, maneuvering her jet close enough to the civilian aircraft to serve as a visual guide, but careful not to create turbulence that could destabilize it further. The fog thinned just enough to reveal the runway in the distance, a narrow strip of hope in an otherwise gray expanse. Minutes felt like hours. Emily's squadron mirrored her every move, the tension in the cockpit palpable. Then a sudden mechanical twitch in the civilian plane sent a jolt through the formation. Emily's instincts kicked in. She adjusted her positioning, signaling, with her lights and radio commands, directing the aircraft in a gentle, precise arc toward the runway. The landing was not smooth. Wheels scraped, tires squealed, and the plane shuddered as it touched down, but it held together. Emily's heart leapt in silent triumph as she guided the plane to a full stop at the far end of the runway. Her squadron followed, landing safely. Behind her, in perfect formation, the control tower erupted in applause, though Emily barely heard it over the hum of her engines. She removed her helmet, revealing a face slick with sweat, eyes bright with the adrenaline of survival and triumph. Harris approached, his usual arrogance replaced by a quiet nod. "Angel-01, he said simply. "You saved them." Emily allowed herself a small, tight smile. She had faced danger head-on, proving to herself and everyone around her that she was more than a call sign. She had earned respect through courage, skill, and unshakable calm under pressure. Yet, as she debriefed with the base commanders, Emily realized that victory was only one step on a longer path. The mission had exposed vulnerabilities, both in equipment and in leadership, and someone would have to take responsibility. She could see whispers already forming in the officers' lounge, questions about risk assessment and protocol, but she refused to be intimidated. That night, as the airfield lay quiet under a blanket of stars, Emily walked along the tarmac, the roar of engines replaced by the soft rustle of wind and the occasional distant hum of a jet on patrol. She felt the weight of what had just happened, not just the successful mission, but the realization that the world was watching, waiting for the next slip, the next failure. She thought of her call sign, Angel-01, once a source of ridicule, now a quiet symbol of triumph. It was more than a name. It was proof that perseverance, courage, and unwavering determination could transform mockery into legend. And Emily knew this was only the beginning. The challenges ahead would be greater, the risks higher, and the stakes far more personal. But she had faced fear, doubt, and ridicule, and emerged victorious. She had earned her place among the pilots of Ridgefield Airfield. And when the time came, those who had once mocked her would have no choice but to acknowledge the strength, skill, and honor behind the name Angel-01. Weeks passed since the successful interception mission, and Emily Harper's reputation at Ridgefield Airfield had begun to shift. No longer was Angel-01 a name uttered in jest. Instead, it carried weight, a quiet acknowledgement of skill, courage, and determination. Yet with recognition came a new kind of challenge, one far more subtle and insidious than mocking jokes or doubting whispers. The military, like any institution, was rife with politics. Decisions were influenced by ambition, ego, and old alliances. Emily, despite her accomplishments, found herself navigating a web of intrigue she had never expected. Some officers admired her skill. Others resented it. Lieutenant Harris, once a skeptical adversary, maintained a cautious respect, but Emily could sense lingering tension in his demeanor. And then there was Major Langley, a senior officer whose influence over promotions and mission assignments was notorious. Langley had always been dismissive of Emily's abilities, viewing her success as luck or a fluke rather than the product of training, precision, and sheer grit. It started subtly. Missions she volunteered for were suddenly reassigned. Her suggestions in strategy meetings were dismissed or ignored. Rumors began circulating that Angel-01 had taken unnecessary risks during the recent rescue mission, despite clear evidence to the contrary. Emily recognized the pattern immediately. This was an attempt to undermine her credibility and block her from rising further. She felt the sting of injustice keenly. For someone like Emily, who measured herself against her own standards, it was one thing to face external mockery, but another to see her competence questioned without cause. Yet she refused to react with anger. Anger, she had learned, could cloud judgment. Instead, she focused on gathering evidence, documenting every mission, every decision, every calculated risk she had taken. One evening, while reviewing flight logs and communications from the rescue mission, she discovered something that confirmed her suspicions. Certain officers had altered reports in subtle ways, implying negligence on her part. It was not overt sabotage, but enough to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of those who had yet to see her in action. Emily felt the weight of isolation. She had allies among the younger pilots, those who had witnessed her skill firsthand, but she also realized that institutional power could not be overcome by talent alone. She needed strategy, patience, and a clear plan to expose the truth without jeopardizing her career or the lives of those under her command. The tension came to a head during a high-risk training exercise involving simulated emergency landings on short, improvised runways. Emily was assigned to lead the mission, but Major Langley had inserted an extra complication: a faulty communication system. designed to test her, and she suspected, to set her up for failure. As the jets took off, Emily felt a familiar surge of focus. She quickly realized the communications problem would make coordination difficult, but not impossible. Relying on hand signals, visual cues, and pre-planned formations, she guided her squadron with precision. Several pilots began to falter, hesitation creeping into their maneuvers, but Emily remained calm, issuing instructions with clarity and authority. At one point, a young pilot froze mid-flight, disoriented by the lack of radio contact. Emily banked sharply to approach, gesturing for him to follow her lead. She risked breaking formation, knowing that any mistake could reflect poorly on her, but saving her squadron took precedence. The pilot regained composure, following her instructions, and the formation successfully completed the emergency landing. Back on the ground, Emily faced Major Langley during the debrief. Langley's expression was unreadable, but Emily could feel the unspoken accusation lingering in the air. Angel-01, your decision-making was unconventional, he said slowly, as if tasting the words. Some would argue it risked the squadron unnecessarily. Emily met his gaze evenly. Major, every maneuver was calculated, every risk assessed. If there had been any errors, they would have shown in the logs and the telemetry. The squadron landed safely because I acted decisively, not recklessly. Langley said nothing more, but the subtle tension remained. Emily realized that exposing the manipulation and regaining full recognition would require more than skill in the air. It would demand evidence, timing, and unwavering courage on the ground. Over the next several days, Emily worked tirelessly, reviewing records, collecting flight data, and documenting the discrepancies she had noticed. She met with sympathetic officers quietly, sharing the evidence and asking for their guidance. Slowly, a coalition of supporters began to form, those who respected competence over politics and understood the stakes. During one late-night session in the hangar, Emily paused to reflect. The lights cast long shadows across the rows of jets, and the quiet hum of equipment reminded her of the calm she always found in the cockpit. She realized that true courage was not only about facing danger in the air, it was about standing firm in the face of injustice and refusing to let deceit and manipulation diminish her integrity. She also thought of the young pilots who looked up to her, inspired by her example. She could not allow them to see her falter under political gamesmanship. Angel-01 was more than a call sign. It was a symbol of endurance, fairness, and strength. The tipping point came when Emily gathered her evidence and presented it to Colonel Jenkins, the base commander, in a private meeting. Every falsified report, every altered record, and every piece of manipulated data was laid bare. She spoke calmly, articulately, and without rancor, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. Colonel Jenkins listened, his expression serious. After a long silence, he nodded. Angel-01, he said, this is serious. I'll handle it from here. You've done everything right. Your squadron and your reputation will not suffer because of others' deceit. Emily felt a surge of relief, but also a renewed determination. The base had seen her courage in action, her skill, and now her integrity. The mockery, the whispers, and the subtle sabotage would no longer define her. Angel-01 had not only survived the storm, she had begun to turn it into a legend. As she walked back across the tarmac that night, the cool wind brushing against her face, Emily realized that the battles she fought were never just about flying. They were about proving, time and again, that courage, integrity, and strength of character could outshine fear, doubt, and manipulation. And she knew that the true test, the one that would cement her legacy, was still ahead. The morning air was sharp and crisp at Ridgefield Airfield, carrying with it a tension that no amount of routine drills could dispel. Emily Harper, call sign Angel-01, stood at the edge of the tarmac, her helmet under her arm, eyes tracing the horizon where storm clouds were gathering. Today's mission was unlike anything she had faced before, a high-altitude reconnaissance and rescue operation over rugged terrain in rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. The call had come from higher command just hours earlier. A small group of hikers had become trapped on a remote mountain ridge during a severe thunderstorm. Emergency services on the ground could not reach them, and the only viable option was aerial extraction. Emily's squadron had been selected due to their experience, cohesion, and reliability, and she had been designated mission leader. As the pilots performed pre-flight checks. Emily's mind ran through every possible scenario. Thunderstorms over mountainous terrain were notoriously unpredictable. One wrong move could result in catastrophic turbulence, mechanical failure, or worse. Yet she felt the familiar surge of determination she had cultivated through years of challenges and mockery. Angel-01 had earned her place here, and she would not let fear dictate the outcome. Lieutenant Harris, now one of her cautious supporters, approached. "Storm's moving faster than expected," he said, voice tense. "Visibility could drop to near zero. Are you sure we should proceed?" Emily nodded, her eyes scanning the sky. "We have no choice. They're counting on us. Keep formation tight, trust your instruments, and follow my lead. We'll get them out safely or die trying." The jets roared down the runway, engines screaming as they lifted into the storm-laden sky. Emily's squadron fell into formation behind her, a precise ballet of steel and speed. The turbulence hit almost immediately, jolting the aircraft violently. Lightning illuminated the clouds in fleeting, blinding flashes, and wind gusts threatened to throw them off course. Emily's heart raced, but her hands remained steady on the controls. She guided the squadron through the worst of the storm with surgical precision, issuing clear commands over the radio. Angle your approach to compensate for crosswind. Maintain altitude and separation. Watch for sudden downdrafts near the ridge. They reached the mountain ridge, and Emily spotted the hikers clinging to a narrow ledge below, barely visible in the storm's gray veil. One of the helicopters designated for extraction had been delayed, leaving her squadron as the immediate lifeline. Emily knew she had to act fast. She executed a low-altitude pass, creating a wind draft to stabilize the hiker's position as a rescue harness was deployed from a support helicopter. The turbulence intensified, tossing her jet and the eye. Others like paper on a windstorm. Emily's eyes flicked between the instruments and the frail figures below. One wrong calculation would send lives, aircraft, and careers spiraling into tragedy. Angel-01, you're too low. Harris shouted over the comms, his voice laced with panic. "I've got it," Emily replied calmly. "Focus on your positioning. We're almost through this." With precise maneuvers, she navigated her aircraft along the ridge, stabilizing the situation long enough for the hikers to be secured. One by one, they were lifted to safety, each harnessed figure a testament to the skill, courage, and composure of the pilots above. But the storm was relentless. A sudden lightning strike ignited a small forest fire nearby, sending smoke and heat into the air currents. Visibility dropped to near zero, forcing Emily to rely entirely on instruments and instincts. Her squadron followed without hesitation, trusting her leadership implicitly. Every twist, turn, and adjustment required split-second decisions. Every heartbeat was a reminder of the fragility of life at this altitude. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the hikers were safely transported to a nearby clearing where emergency medical teams awaited. Emily guided her squadron back toward Ridgefield, battered by wind and rain, but triumphant. As they touched down on the runway, the engines roaring to a halt, a rare silence fell over the airfield, broken only by the distant rumble of the storm. Receding. Emily removed her helmet, drenched in sweat, her uniform soaked but her spirit unbroken. The squadron gathered around, exhausted but exhilarated, and for the first time there were no whispers, no half-smiles, no lingering doubts. Angel-01 had led them through danger with skill, courage, and unshakable calm. Colonel Jenkins stepped forward, eyes shining with pride. "Emily Harper, you've done something extraordinary. Lives were saved today because of your leadership and skill. I don't think there's a single person here who doubts your ability or your courage any longer." Even Harris, standing beside the squadron, nodded solemnly. "You were incredible," he admitted. Emily allowed herself a small, weary smile. She had faced storms, ridicule, sabotage, and fear, and emerged victorious. The legend of Angel-01 had been forged not just in routine missions or controlled exercises, but in moments where lives hung in the balance and every decision carried weight. That night, as the storm cleared and Ridgefield lay under a blanket of stars, Emily walked across the tarmac, the cool wind drying the rain on her face. She reflected on everything she had endured, the mocking laughter at her call sign, the subtle sabotage by jealous colleagues, the doubts from her peers, and the life-or-death challenges she had faced in the air. She realized that every insult, every challenge, every moment of fear had prepared her for this day. Angel-01 was no longer just a call sign. It was a symbol of strength, resilience, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right, no matter the cost. And Emily knew that her journey was almost complete. The final challenge, the one that would cement her legacy and earn the respect of all who had ever doubted her, was still ahead. The air at Ridgefield Airfield was electric that morning. Word had spread quickly. A rare, high-profile joint operation between the base and federal authorities was scheduled, involving live coordination with multiple agencies, including civilian, air traffic control, search and rescue teams, and high-speed intercept units. Emily Harper, call sign Angel-01, had been selected to lead the aerial component, a testament to her growing reputation. The entire base seemed to hold its breath. Even so, tension simmered beneath the surface. Major Langley's disapproval lingered like a shadow, and whispers of past sabotage had not entirely disappeared. Emily felt the weight of expectation pressing on her shoulders, but she had faced storms, mockery, and near death before. Today she was ready. Angel-01 was no longer a joke. She was a leader, a guide, and a symbol of what courage and perseverance could achieve. The mission began with an alert. A cargo aircraft transporting critical supplies had lost navigational guidance and was drifting toward a restricted airspace near a dense urban area. The aircraft was too large to maneuver safely in mountainous terrain, and the risk of a catastrophic accident was high. Emily's squadron scrambled into the sky, engines roaring with authority. She took the lead, her focus absolute. Formation. Tight. Stay on my 6 and follow my maneuvers exactly, she commanded. Her voice carried both calm and certainty, instilling confidence in every pilot. We're bringing them home safely, no matter what. The aircraft below was erratic, buffeted by crosswinds and mechanical issues. Emily carefully coordinated her squadron, guiding them to stabilize the cargo plane's altitude and heading. She executed a series of precise maneuvers to counter the erratic drift, using her jet to create air currents that nudged the larger plane into alignment with the emergency landing strip. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sky, and thunder rolled across the mountains. Emily felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. Every training exercise, every past mission, every moment of mockery and doubt had prepared her for this. The young pilots in her squadron followed her without hesitation, trusting her instincts implicitly. Suddenly, the aircraft's left engine sputtered. The plane began to veer dangerously toward the edge of the runway. Emily's heart pounded, but she did not hesitate. She radioed precise commands, positioning her jet to create lift and reduce turbulence, guiding the aircraft inch by inch toward. Safety. Time slowed. The runway seemed impossibly narrow, the storm unforgiving. Emily adjusted her altitude, banking sharply, calculating wind speed and the plane's momentum. She felt the weight of every life aboard that aircraft, every life depending on her decisions. Then, with a final precise maneuver, the cargo plane touched down safely. The tires screamed against the tarmac, and the engines shuddered to a halt. The storm continued around them, but the danger had passed. Emily guided her squadron in for safe landings as well, each jet touching down flawlessly. A testament to coordination, skill, and trust, the hangar erupted in cheers. Pilots, mechanics, and officers alike rushed forward, applauding the squadron's success. Colonel Jenkins approached Emily, his expression a mix of pride and awe. Angel-01, he said, voice steady but full of emotion. You have done something extraordinary. You didn't just lead your squadron, you saved lives, upheld the highest standards of skill and courage, and proved that your name carries weight, honor, and respect. I hope you understand what you've accomplished here. Emily allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. She removed her helmet and felt the eyes of everyone at the base on her, not with doubt, not with ridicule, but with admiration. Lieutenant. Harris approached and extended a hand. You've earned this, Harper, he said simply. No one can say otherwise. Even Major Langley, standing off to the side, offered a not a begrudging but undeniable acknowledgment of her skill and integrity. Emily knew that some battles were internal, fought not in the skies, but in the hearts and minds of those around her. Today she had won both. Later, as the sun broke through the storm clouds, painting the airfield in golden light, Emily walked across the tarmac. The jets glinted in the sunlight, symbols of her journey, her struggles, and her triumphs. She thought back to the days when the name Angel-01 had been a joke, when laughter followed her down the hangar corridor, and doubt clouded every mission. Those days were gone. She had turned ridicule into legend, mockery into respect, and doubt into proof of her strength. Angel-01 was no longer merely a call sign. It was a symbol of perseverance, courage, and unwavering dedication. Emily paused at the edge of the runway, the wind carrying the scent of rain and jet fuel, and allowed herself a deep breath. She had endured storms of every kind, physical, emotional, and political, and emerged stronger for each one. Her journey had been long, difficult, and at times lonely, but the rewards were profound. And as the control tower crackled with the final, unmistakable acknowledgement, Angel-01 cleared to land, all systems secure. Emily Harper smiled, knowing that she had finally earned the honor, the respect, and the legacy she had fought for. The call sign that had once been mocked had become legendary, and Angel-01 had landed with honor.